The Whispering Ridge. It began, as many quiet mysteries do, with a whisper. Not the kind you hear from lips, but the kind that comes from wind sliding through pine trees, from snow melting deep beneath the ground, or from earth pressing slowly against itself. In the north of Norway, where the days stretch long in summer and the nights fall hard in winter, there is a village called Vestdal. Fewer than 200 people live there. Their houses are painted red, yellow, and white, scattered like toy blocks beside a long, narrow lake. Towering above Vestdal is a mountain known to the locals as Skarns Ridge. It is not the tallest mountain in Norway. It does not smoke like a volcano, nor does it shine like snow-covered peaks in travel magazines. But it has a presence, heavy, still, and strangely quiet. It rises from the earth like the back of some ancient animal sleeping beneath moss and stone. The people of Vestdal treat the mountain with respect. Some avoid speaking its name. Others hang small silver charms near their windows to keep the old ground peaceful. No one remembers when the tradition began. Some say their great-grandparents spoke of it. Some say older. Each year, just after the first snow falls, the same thing happens. A few villagers notice something out of place. A path that used to point straight now bends slightly to the right. A stream near the eastern slope flows at a new angle. A hunting cabin built close to a boulder seems farther away than before. The changes are so small, so gentle, that no one outside Vestdal believes them. And yet, over the years, the villagers have grown used to this strange rhythm. They call it the mountain's walk. Scientists have never studied it seriously. Why would they? Mountains don't move. But that winter, that changed. Her name was Elise Berglund, a 30-year-old geographer from Oslo. She had grown up in the south, but had always been drawn to stories of the far north. While others found comfort in warm apartments and quiet libraries, Elise preferred cold winds, sharp rocks, and forgotten maps. She first heard about Skarns Ridge in a letter from a retired cartographer, a man who had worked with old military maps during the 1970s. He mentioned something curious. That mountain by Vestdal, it doesn't sit where it used to. Elise laughed when she read the sentence, but then she looked again, and something inside her, a kind of curiosity she couldn't quite explain, stirred. Within a month she had booked a train north, carrying little more than a backpack, a digital map tablet, and a notebook filled with half-scribbled questions. The train ride was long. Snow fell outside the window in thick curtains, hiding the world in white. As she stepped off at the tiny station near Vestdal, the air hit her like a wall of glass, cold, dry, silent. There it stood in the distance, Skarns Ridge, not smoking, not glowing, just watching. Something about it made her feel small. She walked slowly toward the village, boots crunching against frozen ground. And somewhere beneath that mountain, deep in the earth, something shifted, just a little.
Elise rented a room above the only shop in Vestdal, a small wooden store that sold bread, dry socks, fishing tools, and batteries. The owner, a gray-bearded man named Knut, gave her a curious look when she said she came to study the mountain. "People here don't study the ridge," he said as he handed her the key. "They live beside it. That's enough." But Elise was not like the people here. She didn't want to live beside the mountain. She wanted to understand it. Her room was simple: one bed, one desk, one window. That window, however, framed the ridge perfectly. Every morning, Elise sat at her desk with a cup of coffee and stared at the mountain. And every morning, she noticed the same thing. It never looked quite the same. A shadow moved, a ridgeline sharpened, a tree disappeared behind stone. Still, she knew her eyes could play tricks, so she turned to something that didn't lie: maps. She had brought a collection of scanned maps from different years: a German military map from 1944, a Norwegian hiking guide from 1979, a satellite image from 2001, and the most recent satellite overlay from 2023. For hours she compared the shapes, the curves, the lines. Then she began to trace them one by one on clear plastic sheets, laying each over the next. The differences were not large: a slight curve in a river, a shift in the slope. But as she aligned the 1944 image over the one from 2023, she saw it clearly. The entire ridge had moved. Not far, maybe 5 meters, maybe a little more. But mountains do not move 5 meters in 80 years, not without reason. She needed to confirm this in the field. Elise borrowed a snowmobile from Knut and drove toward the base of the ridge. The wind was sharp, pushing dry snow across the open ground. The landscape was silent, except for the motor and the sound of her own breath inside the helmet. At the base of the mountain, she found old survey stakes, wooden poles marked with paint and numbers. Some were broken, others stood half buried in snow. She used her GPS device to check their coordinates. They didn't match the coordinates listed in the survey documents she had found in the university archives. Each marker was off, by centimeters, sometimes a full meter. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough. Later that night, Elise sat with Knut by the shop's wood-burning stove. She showed him her findings, carefully pointing out the mismatched points. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "There's a story my grandfather used to tell about how the mountain wasn't always here." Elise leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "He said it used to sit farther east, not far, just over there." He nodded toward the window. "Then one day, it was here." She waited for more, but Knut only shrugged. "Elise," he said quietly, "some things don't want to be measured." The words stayed with her through the night. The next day, she reached out to her friend Anya, a climate researcher based in Tromsø, and asked her for thermal imaging records and ice core samples near Vestdal. The area had never been fully studied. It was too quiet, too remote. Anya promised to send what she could. Meanwhile, Elise began planning an expedition. She would go up the ridge. She would place new markers, collect rock samples, and map every feature herself. But as she packed her bag with tools and warm clothes, she heard a low sound in the distance. Not thunder, not wind. It was more like a deep groan, ancient, tired, and coming from inside the mountain.
The sky was a soft, pale gray the morning Elise began her climb. She wasn't alone. 2 others joined her: Magnus, a local forestry worker with wide shoulders and calm eyes, and Liv, a geology student from Bergen, who had seen Elise's online notes and begged to join. Together, they carried enough equipment to last 3 days: tents, food, climbing tools, ice drills, measuring rods, and notebooks. The villagers watched them leave in silence. "It's just a hill," Liv said as they started the first ascent. "How bad could it be?" Magnus gave a quiet shake of his head. "It's not a hill. Not really." The base of Skarn's Ridge was forested, thick with pine and birch, the ground covered in a crust of snow and broken stone. At times they walked through soft patches, where the earth felt spongy, unstable. Elise paused at one such area and kneeled to touch it. It wasn't soil. It was old ice, thinly covered in moss and rock. "Permafrost," Liv said, peering closer. "But it's melting." They pressed forward, rising slowly toward the upper slopes. As they climbed, the air grew sharper. The trees thinned. The wind carried strange sounds, not howls or whispers, but short, sudden cracks, like bones shifting deep underground. By the afternoon of the second day, they reached a ledge where the landscape opened wide. From there they could see everything: the valley, the lake, the ribbon of road cutting toward the village. Elise turned and looked behind her. Scarn's Ridge stretched farther than she expected. The mountain wasn't a single peak. It was a long body, curving like a frozen wave. Magnus pointed to a place ahead where the rocks turned white. "That's the old glacier bed," Magnus said. "Locals don't go there." "Why not?" Elise asked. He didn't answer. The three made camp on a flat patch beside a frozen stream. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. The wind had died down, but she felt something beneath her sleeping mat, a subtle vibration, like a purring engine buried deep in the earth. The next morning, they moved toward the glacier site. The sun bounced off the ice, making everything shimmer. As they got closer, Elise noticed the texture beneath her boots had changed. The crunch of snow was softer here, the rhythm more uncertain. Then she saw it. A long, jagged crack, nearly a meter wide, ran across the ice field. It hadn't been there on the maps. Liv examined the edge. "This is fresh, very fresh, maybe just days old." They followed the crack for almost half a kilometer until it vanished beneath a rock slide. There the ice was dark and almost blue. Elise used a small pickaxe to chip at it. Beneath the surface was frozen mud, stones, and something else. "A tree root?" Magnus guessed. Elise pulled gently at the object. It was hard, cold, and shaped like wood, but it snapped like crystal. "Frozen vegetation," Elise said, "from a time before the ice covered it." They drilled a short core from the glacier and sealed it in a metal tube. Inside were thin layers of ice, some clear, some clouded with dust. Elise counted them silently, year by year, century by century. "Some of this ice is more than 1,000 years old," she said. As they worked, clouds began to gather above them. The temperature dropped. Magnus checked the radio but found no signal. "We need to camp lower," he warned. "Storm's coming." They moved quickly, but the snow caught them before they reached shelter. The sky darkened, the wind howled, and snow fell sideways. They were forced to stop and dig into the slope, building a makeshift shelter between large boulders. Inside the cramped space, huddled together for warmth, they listened. And in the silence between gusts of wind, they heard it again. That deep, distant groan. It didn't come from the wind. It didn't come from the storm. It came from the mountain itself. Magnus whispered, "My grandfather once said the ridge is not a mountain. It's a traveler." Elise looked at him. "A traveler?" "He said it's on its way somewhere, and we're just in its path." No one slept that night.
The storm passed by dawn.
Thick clouds remained overhead, but the wind had calmed, and the snow fell gently now, light as ash. Elise stepped out from the shelter first. Everything was silent, covered in a soft white blanket. The glacier below shimmered in the weak morning light. But something had changed. The crack they had followed the day before had widened. What was once a thin line had now grown to nearly 2 meters. Small rocks and clumps of earth had tumbled into it overnight. Elise knelt at the edge, her breath visible in the cold air. The crack wasn't just a surface feature, it was deep. A dark mouth into the unknown. "We need to get inside," she said quietly. Liv hesitated. "That's dangerous." "I know," Elise said. "But if this mountain really moves, maybe we'll see why, down there." Using ropes and harnesses, the team slowly lowered themselves into the crevice. The walls of the crack were rough with frozen mud and embedded stones, some of them sharp as glass. After about 5 meters, they found a ledge wide enough to stand on. Elise clicked on her headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing something astonishing. Beneath the frozen mud was blue ice, clear and layered like glass pages in a frozen book. Each layer had its own texture, its own trapped particles and bubbles. And within one cloudy layer, Elise saw something unexpected. "Look," she whispered. Inside the ice was a small branch, twisted, dry, but perfectly preserved. It had no bark, but still held its shape. It was proof that this layer had once been above ground. "This is not a normal mountain," Liv said. Magnus ran a gloved hand along the ice wall. "It's like the mountain is riding the glacier, sitting on top of it." That theory gave Elise pause. If the ridge was not anchored to the bedrock below, if it was simply perched on a moving sheet of ancient ice, then the entire mountain could, in theory, slide, slowly, almost invisibly, over years, over centuries. They climbed back to the surface and made camp further down the slope where the snow was lighter. That night, they studied the ice core samples again. Liv pointed to a faint line in one of the tubes. She said, "This part is dirty. Dust, ash, maybe volcanic?" Elise nodded. "Could be from the eruption of Laki in 1783. If that's true, we can date this layer exactly." She marked it in her notebook, along with other notes. Changing stream directions, shifting survey points, preserved wood inside the ice. All of it pointed to the same possibility. The landscape was in motion. Later, while walking alone near the stream, Elise paused and looked back toward the ridge. The snow reflected the dim light, and everything seemed soft and dreamlike. Then she noticed something odd. A small boulder, round, flat, and marked with lichen, sat halfway between 2 trees. She remembered that boulder. Yesterday, it had been near their shelter. She returned to camp and said nothing at first. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she had remembered it wrong. But something inside her whispered that she hadn't. The next morning, they prepared to descend. Elise packed carefully, wrapping the ice cores and rock samples in thermal containers. Before they left, she planted new survey markers, bright red flags with GPS beacons, along the slope and near the glacier's edge. "We'll check them again next season," she said. But Magnus didn't answer. He was staring up at the ridge. "What is it?" she asked.
He pointed to a cluster of trees just above the glacier. "They used to be closer," he said. "I'm sure of it." Liv looked too. "I think you're right. They're farther back." Elise's heart beat faster. They were seeing it. Not just guessing or measuring, but truly seeing it. The mountain was moving. Not in hours, not in days, but in slow, creeping moments. A journey across time. As they left Scarness Ridge behind, Elise turned one last time to look at it. The snow fell in slow flakes. The wind didn't stir. But beneath that silent surface, something ancient, cold, heavy, and filled with quiet force was pushing forward.
The theory of a moving world. Back in Oslo, Elise's apartment felt too warm, too still. The city noises, car tires on wet roads, distant voices, the mechanical sigh of heaters were louder than she remembered. Yet her mind stayed in the north. Every night she dreamed of Scarness Ridge, of blue ice, slow cracks, and the silence of a world in motion. She organized her data carefully. GPS points, core samples, hand-drawn maps, drone photos, and glacial records. Then she sent them to research contacts across Scandinavia. 2 weeks later, the replies began. Most were cautious, a few were dismissive. Movement of such a large body is improbable. Could be survey error. Perhaps seasonal ground swelling. But one response stood out. It came from Dr. Henrik Lovgren, a senior geologist at the University of Uppsala. He had studied similar terrain in Greenland, glaciers hidden beneath rocky surfaces where layers of earth slid slowly on ice without obvious signs. If what you're seeing is true, he wrote, then Scarness Ridge may be a rock glacier. Rare, but not impossible. Elise invited him to Oslo. When he arrived, he carried 2 boxes of field notes and a dusty binder marked Periglacial Landforms, Unresolved Cases. Together, they reviewed the evidence. A rock glacier, he explained, is not quite a glacier and not quite a mountain. It's a blend, a mass of rock, debris, and interstitial ice that flows slowly downhill, pulled by gravity and softened by thawing. These formations are ancient, Henrik said. Some are thousands of years old. They move, barely, a few centimeters a year, maybe less. He tapped Elise's data. But this one, he continued, has something different, a structure, a shape, not just loose stone. It behaves more like a single object, riding on top of a frozen base. Elise shared the core samples. Henrik grew quiet as he examined the layers, especially the band marked with volcanic ash from 1783. Glacial movement since this event must be significant, he said, and if it trapped vegetation along the way, the ice is active. Elise leaned forward. What if we're watching a mountain move across centuries? Henrik smiled faintly. Then you're watching the earth breathe. They brought in more experts, climate scientists, glaciologists, geomorphologists. Each brought their own theory. Some pointed to permafrost thaw, which could cause slopes to slip over time, especially with warming temperatures. Others believed in deep-seated landslides, hidden under layers of snow and soil, creating an illusion of a slow journey. A few mentioned subglacial rivers carving soft paths under the ice. But none of them could fully explain the unity of the movement, the way the ridge appeared to keep its shape as it crept. And there was still one thing they couldn't answer. Why now? Had the ridge always been moving, or had something changed? Back in Vestal, new survey markers sent GPS updates. The results shocked even the cautious experts. Several markers had shifted slightly. Less than a meter, but enough to matter. Enough to prove that Elise wasn't imagining it. She returned to the village in early spring with a full team and new instruments: thermal scanners, seismographs, ground-penetrating radar. This time, Knut didn't laugh. He only gave her a bag of dried fish and a nod of quiet respect. As they set up instruments along the ridge, villagers came out to watch. Some offered help. Others simply stood with arms crossed, silent. At night, she held a meeting in the town hall to explain what they knew. She showed images of the glacier, the cracks, the vegetation inside the ice. Then an old woman in a green shawl raised her hand. "My grandmother said Skarnes Ridge was once a stone boat, built by the old gods to carry something across the earth." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Elise smiled too, but not dismissively. Stories like that, she knew, came from somewhere. And the idea of a traveling mountain, part stone, part ice, part memory, sounded, somehow, not so far from science. That night, the instruments picked up a low-frequency tremor, just a brief vibration, a pulse in the ground. It came from beneath the ridge.
The tremor lasted only 20 seconds, just long enough for Elise, lying half awake in her cabin outside the village, to feel her water bottle roll gently across the floor. She sat up, heart pounding. But the room was still. No aftershock, no panic, just silence. The team gathered early. Most hadn't felt it, but the seismograph had captured everything. Low and steady, like a breath under the earth. Henrik stared at the printout and said, almost to himself, "It's not noise, it's direction." The signal came from deep beneath Skarnes Ridge, moving northwest, away from the glacier, away from Vestal. "It's traveling," Elise whispered. They decided to hike back to the glacier site. This time, the snow had melted in patches, revealing soft moss and wet earth. Where there had been only ice and stone before, now there were small trickles of water running in new paths. The air was colder than it should have been for spring, and something about the light felt strange, sharper, yet muted, as if the mountain was trying to hide itself in plain sight. They reached the crack. It was wider. The red survey markers Elise had planted weeks ago now leaned at odd angles. One had been pulled halfway into the split, its metal base twisted. She checked the GPS logs on her tablet. The coordinates were off by nearly 2 meters. "That's impossible," Liv murmured. "That's more movement than we expected in 10 years. "Unless it's accelerating," Henrik said. They climbed higher, past the glacier bed, to a ridge Elise hadn't noticed before. There, the rock underfoot felt soft. Not crumbling, not muddy, just strangely pliable, like hardened wax warming under the sun. She tapped it with her boot. A hollow sound answered. They took turns with the ground-penetrating radar. The image came slowly, lines building on the screen. Beneath them, 50 meters down,
was a layer of empty space, a long dark tunnel, or perhaps a cavity where the ice had melted and the ground hadn't collapsed yet. Henrik stared at it for a long time. This mountain isn't sitting still. It's floating, he said. Floating on ice? Liv asked. Or on water? Or both? That night, they stayed in tents high on the ridge. It was clear, windless, but no one slept. At around 3 a.m., Elise stepped outside. The mountain loomed behind her, solid and unmoving. She turned her head toward the lake, and then she felt it. Not a quake, not a rumble, but a shift. A slow, dragging pressure in the soles of her boots. The kind of feeling you only notice when everything else is perfectly still. She looked up. A crack appeared in a nearby rock face, just a thin white line, slicing slowly downward, like a crack in old glass. No sound, no vibration, just movement. The next morning, the team reviewed the instruments again. Multiple micro-shifts, all in the same direction. Northwest. Away from Vestal. Away from the lake. "Are we in danger?" Elise asked quietly. Henrik didn't answer right away. Then he said, "No. Not today. Not this year." "But it's going somewhere." He nodded. "Yes, eventually." Elise stood for a long moment, looking across the valley. The trees, the lake, the village, all unchanged. But now she saw everything differently. Not as a still photograph, but as part of a story that was still unfolding. A mountain, once thought eternal, was quietly on a journey. Later that day, the team packed their things. The weather was turning again. Before they left, Elise walked alone back to the glacier's edge. She placed one hand on the stone, cold and dry, and whispered, "Where are you going?" Of course, there was no answer. But as she turned away, she felt, no, she sensed it, again. The faintest pulse underfoot. A heartbeat. Ancient. Patient. The mountain was moving. And it didn't need to speak to be heard.
Key vocabulary from the story. 1. Ridge. A long, narrow area of high ground, like the top of a mountain. Example: Scarn's Ridge stood silently above the village. 2. Crack. A narrow break or opening, often in rock or ice. Example: a long crack ran through the glacier bed. 3. Survey. To measure and record the position or features of an area. Example: Elise placed survey markers along the slope. 4. Permafrost. Ground that stays frozen year-round, often found in polar regions. Example: the team discovered melting permafrost beneath the moss. 5. Seismograph.
a tool that detects movements in the earth, such as tremors. Example: the seismograph recorded a low-frequency tremor from beneath the ridge. 6. Glacier: a large mass of ice that moves slowly over land. Example: beneath the ridge was an ancient glacier, hidden under stone. 7. Theory: an explanation based on evidence, but not yet fully proven. Example: scientists discussed theories about how the mountain could be moving. 8. Accelerate: to move faster or increase in speed. Example: the GPS data showed the mountain's movement had accelerated. 9. Cavity: a hollow space inside something, like a tunnel or a gap. Example: radar revealed a deep cavity beneath the surface. 10. Tradition: a long-held custom or belief passed down through generations. Example: villagers placed charms near windows, following old traditions. Useful sentence patterns for practice. 1. It wasn't just, it was. It wasn't just ice, it was blue ice, layered like glass. 2. No one could explain. No one could explain why the mountain shifted slightly each year. 3. If, subject, was, verb, then. If the mountain was truly moving, then the whole valley could change. 4. It felt like. It felt like the earth was breathing beneath their feet. 5. Some said, others believed. Some said the mountain was cursed. Others believed it was alive. Comprehension questions. 1. What was unusual about Skarner's Ridge according to the villagers? 2. What made Elise suspect the mountain was moving? 3. What did the team discover beneath the surface of the mountain? 4. What is a rock glacier, and how might the ridge's movement be explained? 5. Why did Henrik say the mountain might be floating? 6. How did the villagers' traditions connect to the scientific mystery? 7. What did the radar reveal about the structure beneath the ridge? Discussion question. If mountains and landscapes can move so slowly that people don't notice, how might that change the way we think about permanent places? Discuss how nature can shift over time and what that means for the way humans build and live.